Big day. Big day. Very colorful day. We're going to encounter an amazing story today. And this one calls for a l'chaim. It's Thursday. Okay. Ooh. Only one day to go till Shabbos. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niheh b'divaro. A lovely tequila. As we say, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. Who's in the house? Georgia Otia, watching from Cameroon. Welcome, George. And you've got it. That's exactly what we need. Everybody, tell us where you're tuning in from. Your comments, signal to Facebook. This is a conversation starter. Something valuable is happening here. And because you do that, more people will be shown this show in their news feeds. It's a direct correlation. You hit those like and love buttons, you write in the comments, you share this broadcast on your news feed. More people will see it and will light up the darkness with something of value. Timeless Jewish wisdom. Mary Garrow from Auburn, New York. Tracy Lawrence from Orlando, Florida. Who's next? Misty. Did I say it right? Laurengel? Misty Laurengel from Michigan. Can we get, so we've got Africa and we've got North America in the house. Do I hear a Europe? Do I hear a South America? Kathleen, Peppy Southern. Hey, y'all, from Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Kathleen. And oh my goodness, I don't know how to read that. What is that alphabet? Is that the Cyrillic alphabet? It says, why you are here. I'm not sure what you're asking, but we're here to learn together. This is AT Daily. We are working our way through the 7.5-year Talmud study cycle known as Daf Yomi. Today's page is 27 in the first volume of the Talmud, Berachos, Blessings. We're on page 27 of Masechet Berachos. We have just started chapter 4 of Berachos, and so we are now studying the Amidah, the basic prayer. When the sages say praying, a man is praying, a woman is praying, they're referring specifically, it's like jargon, and prayer refers to the Amidah, the standing prayer, also known as Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings. And we've started to discuss how this formula of prayer came to be. It reached its final form under the supervision of our sages in the Talmudic period, but it started much before that. And in fact, the question is, are these prayers, the morning, afternoon, and evening prayer, based on the prayers instituted by our patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who started the morning, afternoon, and evening prayer in that order? They prayed at those times of day, but the nature of these prayers is actually more related to the temple offerings when the Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem. And so when we lost the temple, these prayers came to stand in the place on behalf of the nation for the communal offerings that we had when the temple stood. There was a morning and an afternoon offering every day in the temple. There was not an evening offering, and so that raises the question, which we're going to get at today, of was the evening prayer optional, right? In the evening temple offering, there was no offering in the temple. The fats and limbs of animals that were offered during the day were left on the altar pyre to burn and be consumed during the night. So there's some, connection between the evening prayer and what was going on in the evenings in the temple, but there was not an evening offering. There was an additional offering, an extra offering that would be brought on Shabbat, on Rosh Chodesh. We just entered a new month. Excuse me. We just entered a new month. And so when there was the Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of a new month, or Shabbat, or festivals, there would be an additional offering for those special days. And now in our prayers, we have an additional prayer called the Musaf Amida, or the Musaf Shmona Esrei, additional, which we say on Shabbat, and we say on Rosh Chodesh, and we say on festivals. So on those days, we say the Amidah as communally 4 times. Morning, additional, afternoon, and evening. So let's get into that. Okay, so the question comes up, if you have a special day, a Shabbat, a Rosh Chodesh, or a festival in which you're going to do this additional Amidah, this additional prayer, which recalls the additional offering which was brought in the Holy Temple. And in fact, when we do this additional Amidah, in the body of that prayer, we refer to these offerings that were brought and the particular offerings of that festival or of the Shabbat offering or the Rosh Chodesh offering that we had of the month, of the new month. We refer to it in the prayer. On a day when we have an additional offering, when do we bring it? Let's say it's going to happen in the morning. So there's a question, which do we do first? The morning prayer or the Musaf prayer, right? Just like in the in the temple, which would they do first? The regular weekday morning offering or the special offering for the festival. You might think that since we're bringing a special offering that's only brought once a week for Shabbat, or once a month if it's the Rosh Chodesh offering, or once a year if it's the first day of Shavuot offering, or the first day of Sukkot offering, the special offerings every day of Sukkot. So the special offering that is tied to that holiday only, since it's so special, you might think that it gets priority and it goes first before the daily offering. And the answer is no, the daily offering goes first. When there is a conflict between a practice that is frequent and a practice that is infrequent, we give priority, according to our sages, to the practice that is more frequent. And that's a very beautiful teaching, right? Because you would think that things that only happen once a year, they're more special, so we want to give them their due, and something we do every day can get pushed aside and at least go second. It's not like we're going to forget about it and not do it, but we'll do it second after the more special offering. But no, the daily practice is prioritized over the infrequent practice. What do we learn from that? Faith, religious practice, like any kind of practice. I was an athlete in college. I was on a rowing team. We were a very successful rowing team. We worked our butts off all year long for 6 races in the spring. And we're a very successful team. We won almost all those races in the 4 years that I was there in the spring because of the hard work that we did on a daily basis in the midst of the winter when it was so cold, and during spring break when all the other students went to party on a beach in Mexico and we stayed in the frozen cold and working out on machines in the boathouse, etc. It's a daily practice, and our sages prioritize what we do every day. Sometimes, when you're just starting to become more connected, more religious, you might go to a prayer service at an Orthodox shul, and let's say you've had some sort of powerful religious experiences, and now you want to deepen your connection to Hashem, to God, and to Judaism. And so you go to an Orthodox shul, and the morning prayers, they're fast, they're mumbled. And it feels sort of uninspiring. It's not like, people singing with lots of spirit. And you think, oh, these guys are just going through the motions. They're just fulfilling their obligations so they can say they've done it. It's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that deeper spiritual connection. But what you have to understand is if you're going every day to synagogue, twice a day, maybe even 3 times a day, praying not just 3 times a day by yourself, but getting out of your house and driving over to the synagogue and doing it with the community as we're obliged to do, you're not going to, people have lives to lead. You can't, have that big spiritual, deep experience every time you go to synagogue and join the community, right? But how many people go to synagogue every day? When you do that, when you go every day, even though it can seem like you're just sort of putting in your time on that day, you are putting another brick in the mansion, right? It's another brick in the mansion. Every time you show up and you do your daily practice, you might not have the big, overwhelming spiritual experience that day, but you're adding a brick to the mansion, and because you put in all that time, so now and then, here and there, you have the breakthrough, right? And the breakthrough is a result of all that daily work. And it's not that surprising that faith works so similarly, to any other worthwhile endeavor that takes daily practice, daily work. And I think that's the message from our sages when they say that the more frequent practice, when in conflict with an infrequent practice, is prioritized over the infrequent practice. Okay. A question now comes up here on page 27 of until what time, just like we discussed at the beginning of this tractate, until what time may we say the daily Shema. Now we're talking about the daily prayer, the daily Amidah, and until what time, from what time, and until what time. And the answer is ultimately going to be the fourth hour of the day. A question comes up, does that mean including the fourth hour, up to and including, or up to the beginning of the fourth hour, right? If it's the fourth hour of the day, so what is the actual time limit when it's expired, our opportunity has expired, and we missed it? And so they'll argue and should bring down various proofs and sort of how this has worked out in other settings. Does up to mean up to and including, or just up to and not including, right? So there's going to be a big discussion about that. But in order to understand what they mean by the fourth hour, we have to understand what the sages mean when they say an hour. And to understand that, we have to understand this term, and I want to make sure I get it right? So sha'ah zimanit, sha'ah zimanit. And what they're talking about is the variable hour, because halachically, so talking about Jewish law and working out what time things happen during the day, when they say the fourth hour, I mean, that's like a little weird, right? Because in the winter, sunrise is, and they're measuring from sunrise. But sunrise in the winter happens at a very different time of day on our regular clocks, the way we measure them in our culture, from sunrise in the summer, right? Sunrise in the summer, might be 5 a.m. Sunrise in the winter might be 6:30 a.m., even later. Very different. So, and they're always saying it's the fourth hour. So how does that work? I mean, was their time just so, inexact that they meant kind of around the fourth hour? And the answer is no. The sages were actually very exact. And the way that they measure time is like this. Daylight, no matter how long it is, summer or winter, is divided into 12 halachic hours, also known as variable hours or proportional hours. So no matter how long daylight is, short in the winter, long in the summer, that amount of daylight gets divided into 12 equal parts. So right now, at the end of January in Los Angeles, because this is totally going to vary depending on how far north or south of the equator you are, the days are longer or shorter depending on how far north, right, from the middle of the earth you are. So here in LA, now in January, an hour, a halachic hour, is 53 minutes and 5 seconds long. So when an Orthodox Jew is wondering, like, what time is the morning prayer, what time can I pray in the morning, from what time in the morning, and until what time may I say the afternoon prayer in the evening, and from what time may I say the nighttime prayer. So the times are changing every day. These days, very easy. You don't have to calculate any of this. You just Google the word in your area, zmanim, or you use an app. I mean, I have 2 different prayer book apps. One is from Chabad, the Chabad Siddur app. Just if you just go to the App Store and put in SIDDUR Siddur, you will get, there's various apps that can give you a prayer book on your phone. And usually they will also include Zmanim, Z-M-A-N-I-M. These are the halachic, the Jewish legal times of sunrise, of mid-morning, of midday, etc. There's like 7 or 8, important times, and they change every day as the calendar changes from winter to summer and back to winter again. So for example, here today in Los Angeles, dawn, okay, that's when the first rays of light in the sky, was 5:31 a.m. The earliest time that a person can put on his prayer shawl, his talit, and tefillin, the black boxes and straps, is 6:05 a.m. So that would correspond to the time when a person technically can distinguish between the blue and the white threads in his tzitzis. Or a person could, recognize the face of a friend at a certain distance away from him. At this point, these times have become normalized, right? And so they're all pre-calculated. You can figure out what the zemanim are, at any geographic point on earth, on any calendar day, centuries ago or centuries forward. You just go to a website called Hebcal, Hebcal, and you'll get the zemanim for your location. So here in LA today, sunrise, 6:52 a.m., also known as Netz, that's sunrise. And some people, the very pious people, this is the ideal way to do morning prayers, they will be saying their Shema just before sunrise, just before Netz, after the point where there's enough light in the world for them to be able to distinguish the face of a friend. And they'll say Shema right before sunrise and Amidah right after sunrise. That's called a Nate's Minyan, when you join a Nate's Minyan. The latest time for saying Shema, halakhically, is not in here in LA today, 9:27 a.m. The latest shachrit, so that means the latest time that you can say the morning Amidah is 10:20 a.m. How do we get that? That's the end of the 4th hour, up to and including the 4th hour. So the end of the 4th hour measured from sunrise. How long is an hour? It's 1/12 of the amount of daylight that we have from sunrise to sunset. And this time of year in LA, these hours are 53 minutes long, right? It's a halachic variable hour. And when you count 4 of them from sunrise, you get to 10:20 a.m. And that's why 10:20 a.m. is the end of the period where you can fulfill your obligation to say the morning Amidah. If you miss that, as we discussed yesterday, you can do a compensatory Amidah by the afternoon service. I always thought, well, if you're just late, you're late, you can do it. And you could just say it late, but then it's sort of like a voluntary prayer, and it will be heard by heaven, but it won't fulfill your obligation of the morning. But if you go to the afternoon prayer and say your afternoon Amidah, and then have a little interruption, you could say Psalm 145, Ashrei, and then you can do another Amidah to make up for the morning. That's what we learned yesterday. And just to finish out the times, midday, halachic midday is 12:06 p.m., the earliest time you can say the afternoon prayer is 12:34 p.m. The time that's ideal for saying the afternoon prayer, the Mincha Ketana, is 3:13 p.m. Plag HaMincha, which is sort of halfway between the middle of the afternoon and sunset, is 4:20 p.m. Sunset here in LA today, also known as Shkia, that's sunset, that's 5:22 p.m. And nightfall, when we would see 3 stars, is 5:48 p.m. So the common practice among many Orthodox Jews is that you can say the afternoon prayer right up until sunset. So you want to get that mincha, that afternoon Amidah done before sunset, and then you're already in synagogue, and then you can, with your minyan, with your group, say the evening prayer right away after sunset. And that's where I go, that's what we usually do, afternoon and evening prayers right before and right after sunset. Okay, while we're discussing this question of does the 4th hour mean the beginning of the 4th hour or the end of the 4th hour, the sages bring a proof from a rabbi named Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. And he's going to address this question of does up to the 4th hour mean up to and including or up to and not including the 4th hour itself. But in order to hear that teaching, we get a baraita, a teaching of this rabbi that included 5 issues on which he testified. So this is one of the reasons why we'll have a digression, right? We'll have a digression because in bringing his teaching about the 4th hour, we're also going to learn about 4 other things that he brought down as teachings from the Second Temple period. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava testified 5 halachos. Number 1, we encourage, okay, so this is complicated. We encourage a minor younger sister to refuse her betrothed husband. So this is a situation where 2 brothers became betrothed, married, 2 sisters. The older sister is an adult and just enters marriage with the older brother. The younger sister is a minor, so she's not going to enter the married state with this man. She's just betrothed to him, so they're prohibited to other people. They're promised to each other, but they're not going to start living as man and wife yet. But the Torah says that a girl who becomes engaged when she's a minor, when she reaches adulthood, she has a choice to say, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to marry this guy. So that's actually quite a bit of independence for women at millennia before women achieved such rights in the general culture. In this case, we actually encourage her to break off the betrothal. Why? Because they shouldn't have entered this situation. 2 brothers shouldn't marry 2 sisters in the ancient world. Why? Because if the older brother dies, the one who's married to the sister, and he dies before they have children, so his younger brother has an obligation called yibum to marry the widow of his brother and get her pregnant so that she'll have a child, and that child will actually be considered legally, right, under the Torah law, to be the son of the dead brother. This way, if you die before you have children and you have a brother, he has an obligation to come in and marry the widow and have a child with her, and then that child is considered the successor and heir of the older brother who died and didn't have kids. The problem in this situation, because they married 2 sisters, is that by Torah law, you cannot marry 2 sisters. Jacob did, Rachel and Leah, but that was before this law was given at Mount Sinai. After this law was given, you do not marry 2 sisters, right? And so to avoid the problem that should that older brother die, and his younger brother has to step in and, do his duty so that his older brother, could have kids that can inherit, his portion of land in Israel and have the rights of an heir, it would create this conflict that he'd be marrying 2 sisters. And to avoid that situation, we encourage the girl to say, this is not the guy for me. I'm going to find another husband. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava also said, in the case of a woman whose husband was away, and remember, in the ancient world, if you went traveling, like away, like to another country, you took a ship on the Mediterranean and went to Rome, for example. It was a huge trip, a huge and difficult and dangerous trip. No telephones, no cell phones, no telegraph, barely a mail service. And if you went away for months. And if a man went away and encountered all kinds of dangers and, thieves and ruffians and soldiers and brigands on the road, he could be killed. He could be robbed and killed. And maybe she would never know, his wife waiting for him would never know what happened to him. And then she couldn't remarry because it was never proven that her husband had died, right? She might be a widow, but caught in the terrible situation of a stranded wife who doesn't know whether her husband is dead or not. And normally, to testify that such a person has died, any kind of legal matter, we need 2 witnesses. But Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava testified that you only need 1 witness to testify that if that husband died, there was a witness who saw him die or has good information that he's dead, but there's only 1 witness, that's enough. In all other legal matters that require witnesses, we require 2 witnesses. But to make sure that this woman is not stranded waiting for her husband who might never come home, if there's 1 witness that he died, that's enough. And that avoids the problem known as an aguna, a stranded wife. Number 3, he testified, this is colorful, that if a rooster kills a person, and this happened once, the rooster is stoned to death just like the ox that gores a person, right? The Torah says that if an ox gets away from its master, now, an ox with horns, that's a dangerous animal, like a bull, right? Imagine charging a person and killing a person could happen. So then we kill the ox because it killed a human, right? We stone it to death. If a rooster should kill a person, and how would a rooster kill a person? You can imagine it jumps on a person when he's in a situation that being distracted and scared that a bird jumped on him, he might fall off a roof or something like that. But if a rooster kills a person in that way, so we kill the rooster and we do it in the same way that we would kill the ox, and that's the capital punishment of stoning. Number 4, he testified that the minimum age for wine is 40 days before it can be used as a libation for an offering in the temple. And number 5, that in the temple, the daily morning offering was brought at the end of the 4th hour, up to and including the 4th hour. And that's how we know that our morning prayer can be said up until the end of the 4th hour. Okay. And we also have a tradition, why the 4th hour, that was the time when the manna in the desert, right, that the children of Israel, when they were living in the desert for 40 years, and they were sustained by the mun in Hebrew, or the manna, that appeared on the ground every morning, 6 days a week, and they could gather, and it tasted like whatever your favorite food is, that's what the manna tasted like. But it would melt at the end of the 4th hour. When the sun got high in the sky, the manna would melt. So that's why you got to gather it early in the morning. Okay. Another teaching we have on this page is regarding the afternoon prayer, Mincha. Rabbi Yehuda said you can say it until mid-afternoon, but the sages said you can say it until sunset, and that is the law, as I've mentioned. And then you have to wait until after sunset to say the evening prayer. But on Friday afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, if you want to, you can say Mincha a little earlier, and then you can say the evening prayer before it's evening, right? You can say the evening prayer, the nighttime prayer, before night falls, and thereby bring in Shabbos early. That's an option that people have. And if you say the evening prayer, even while it's still daytime, but you can then light candles, and you can make Kiddush, and you can make Motzi. In other words, you can experience Shabbat early, right? And then you're just going to have a longer Shabbat. And that's a sort of a special dispensation that we make in honor of Shabbat. You can bring in Shabbat early. We have the teaching that we don't pray in front of our rabbi. If our rabbi's praying in the synagogue, we don't go stand right in front of him. That's considered presumptuous, like you're more important than the rabbi. And you don't pray right behind him, because in the prayer we bow it several times, and it shouldn't look like we're bowing not to God, but to our teacher. And we only bow to God, so we don't want to stand right behind our teacher in case it should look like we're bowing to the teacher. And now we come to a very colorful incident when a sage, a head sage, was impeached. Very colorful event. This requires a l'chaim. So, the head of the academy, the head of the Sanhedrin, in the period we're discussing, was a very, very famous rabbi named Rabban Gamliel. And his family was a very, very distinguished family. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, sort of saved Judaism by getting the Roman general who destroyed the temple and sacked Jerusalem, allowed him to take Yavne and its sages, right? To reestablish the seat of Torah learning in the little town of Yavne. And now they were going to sort of recreate Judaism from this temple-based Judaism, sort of run by the priests, to this prayer-based Judaism run by the rabbis, run by the sages, right? And to sort of establish that legitimacy, there would now be a position called the Nasi. right? The Nasi is the head of the Sanhedrin. And I think the first one appointed, I'm not so sure on the history here, but very early in that process was Rabban Gamliel, the famous Rabban Gamliel. And Rabban Gamliel is a very, very tough job, right? So you're now the spiritual authority of the nation, and there's no more king, right? It's like we've lost Israel. They're going to end up, a lot of them end up in Babylonia, where there's an exilarch, okay? And so he's just a very important authority. And what they're trying to do is to create one Judaism, even though even as today, there's a lot of people have different practices, but certain practices have to be, universal for the nation of Israel, the children of Israel, even if they're scattered in different lands. And so as they're working out these various issues, it's very important that there is a central authority. And as they were working that out, some conflicts arose, in this case between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. Just want to make sure that's right. Between Rabbi Yehoshua. So the question that comes up on this page is about the evening prayer, right? So the morning and afternoon prayers correspond to the morning and afternoon offerings in the Holy Temple. There was no offering in the evening, so this evening prayer, which we already have a tradition for, the people had been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands, for hundreds of years. But the question is the evening prayer optional or obligatory? Rabbi Yehoshua said optional. It's a merit if you do it, but technically it's optional. Rabbi Gamliel said obligatory. And when Rabban Gamliel heard that Rabbi Yehoshua had been teaching his students and answering questions for people who asked and saying optional, so then the next time all the sages were assembled together, Rabban Gamliel said, Yehoshua, stand up. I heard that you taught people that it is optional. I get that that's your understanding of the law, but we have decreed as a body that it is obligatory. You can't teach that anymore because there needs to be an authority that people can rely on. This was not the first time that Yehoshua had created this kind of a problem. Earlier, a question had come up of when is Yom Kippur? Now that's an established calendar thing, and we all know when Yom Kippur is. But in ancient times, the beginning of any month happened when witnesses saw the moon and the very particular, like just a little sliver of light on the moon at the moon's renewal, right? A Hebrew month begins with a new moon, right? When there's no moon. But then there's just a little bit of a sliver of light tells you we've reached the new moon, because there's sort of 2 nights in every month which one might be the new moon. It's a little difficult to tell. And once the witnesses have seen exactly the moon the way it's supposed to look, they report that to the Sanhedrin, to this body, and they declare the new month. So there's a whole process for doing that. Eventually, it sort of became predictably calendarized, and they stopped doing this process of testifying and notifying the nation that the new month had begun. But while that was all being worked out, there came a time when Rabban Gamliel says, the new month has begun, and Rabbi Yehoshua said the new month has not begun. And Gamliel said, you can't have that. And so he said to Yehoshua, on the day that you think is Yom Kippur, come to me carrying your staff and your money purse, which you cannot do on Yom Kippur. So for Yehoshua, this was very difficult. On the day he thought was the holiest day of the year, his boss was saying to you, that's not the holiest day of the year. We've decided which day is the holiest day of the year. It's the next day, or the day before, whichever way it worked out. And he says, but on the day you think is Yom Kippur, come to me and basically, show that you're buying into the system, the new system. So because these 2 conflicts happened, that conflict had already happened, and now Yehoshua, again, was just teaching what he believed, but creating a problem of authority and inconsistent teachings coming down from the sages to the population. Gamliel sort of called him out on the carpet in front of all the other sages and made him stand in front of the room for a long time while Gamliel was explaining the problem and while the discussions even then went on. it was like he was being publicly, I don't want to say humiliated, that wasn't the point, but he was being made an example of. And because of that, it was a little bit humiliating. And it was humiliating enough that the other sages didn't like it. They thought that Gamliel was being a little too unkind. They understood his point, but they thought he was being too unkind, too forceful in doing this. And what did they do? They impeached him. They impeached Gamliel. They said, we got to get somebody else to be the head of the academy, the head of the yeshiva. And who are they going to ask? Yehoshua actually was somebody that was very qualified. His wisdom was very great. But because he had been involved in this conflict with Gamliel directly, and lest it be said that, he got into the conflict so that eventually, he would be appointed the replacement, the new head of the academy, and then the motives would be mixed, right? They wanted to try to keep the motives pure in the eyes of the populace. They said, so Yehoshua was the wrong guy. What about Akiva? Akiva was like the most brilliant, the most respected, the greatest teacher. He would be a natural candidate. But they said, once we replace Gamliel, he will resent the new head. Even though it's not the new head didn't orchestrate, this replacement, this removal and replacement. But he will resent the new head so much. And Gamliel is a really great and wise sage who really did his best for the Jewish people. And to have the resentment of such a person could cause you problems at the spiritual level. Like in heaven, they'll look down and they'll be aware that Gamliel, who's such a great and wise and kind person generally, and remember, he did these things not for his own authority, but for the people, that, if he resents somebody, sort of the forces of heaven will look at the person who is resented with some suspicion, and it could cause him problems. And to be protected from that kind of divine retribution associated with Gamliel's resentment, you need somebody who has powerful ancestors in heaven to speak up for you. Akiva was one of perhaps the greatest sage of all time, but he was descended from converts, and so he didn't have this lineage of mighty scholars in his ancestry who would speak up for him in heaven when they saw that Gamliel was resenting him. And so they said, that's not good for Akiva. He doesn't have enough protection to stand up to the storm of Gamliel's resentment. So they looked around, well, who would be a good candidate? And their eyes fell on Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That is a name that if you've ever been to Passover and read the Haggadah, you've heard this name. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you've heard him discuss every Passover. He's the one who says, I am like a man of 70 years, but I never understood this teaching about the plagues and how many plagues, and or the fact that we are to tell the story of the Exodus not only during the day, every day, but at night also. Right? You always say that in the Haggadah. That's Elazar ben Azariah. So that's who they're going to look to. Why? Because he's wise, so he can answer questions. He's qualified to be the head of the academy. Because he's rich. Rich is very valuable. Because the head of the academy might be called to represent the Jewish people in Rome. And if one has to go to Rome, so that's a difficult trip. It's a very expensive trip. He'll be able to pay his own expenses. Because he's rich, he's accustomed to dealing with rich and powerful people. It's valuable to have a rich leader, according to the sages. And finally, in terms of having protection in heaven from distinguished ancestors, Elazar ben Azariah was a 10th generation descendant of Ezra the scribe, who reestablished the Jewish people at the beginning of the Second Temple period. Wonderful, wonderful ancestor to have. And all 10 generations were distinguished scholars. So he really had that lineage, right? Only problem with appointing Elazar ben Azariah to replace Rabbi Gamliel is that Elazar ben Azariah was only 18 years old. You're going to make the head of the academy. He's got all the qualifications, except he's only 18 years old. And so when they invited him, he said, I need to discuss this with my wife. Always a good answer. So he went home, he said, they invited me to be the head of the academy. So his wife said, well, they're removing Gamliel to make room for you, right? They're impeaching Gamliel and removing him so that you can step into his place. Who's to say that when they become unhappy with something you do or you say, they'll just remove you, right? Now they're establishing a precedent that this is like a perishable position of authority. Normally these things were actually like, it was very careful who got chosen and they serve for life, right? But now they're bringing in this new procedure where they're going to remove the head of the academy. And she says, who's to say they won't remove you the same way? His answer, use an expensive goblet today, let it break tomorrow. Meaning, I'm not going to worry about the future. This is an incredible opportunity. I can do a lot of good for my brothers, my sisters, for the people. They've invited me to do it. I'm not going to worry about them removing me later. I'm just going to do my best to serve in this authority. She said, your hair is not white. Meaning you're so young, they're not going to respect you. They're going to push you around. But because he really was qualified, a miracle was performed for Elazar ben Azariah, and overnight, his hair turned white. A miracle was performed for him. And with that white hair and white beard, okay, so he looked, and obviously now this was heaven stepping in and saying, okay, he's qualified. And that is why when we read the Passover Haggadah, it doesn't say, I'm 70 years old and I never understood this teaching. Elazar says, I am like a man of 70 years old, or I am as if I'm 70 years old. And it's for that reason. He's not 70, but he looks like an older person because of that miracle of giving him the white hair. As I recall, ultimately Rabban Gamliel will get his position back. Elazar doesn't serve for the rest, throughout. Elazar's going to come back around. He's going to serve for a while, then Gamliel's going to get the position back, and then I think Elazar's going to come back around and get it later. I'm not quite sure about that. That's just from my memory. But in this story that we encounter here on Berachos 27, Gamliel gets pushed aside, and impeachment works, and Elazar steps into this situation. Okay, that is our page for today. I'll just take a look at the comments to see if there were any questions that I can address. Tracy says, what a great way to also be mindful of the solar cycles of the place you live. Exactly. Those zemanim, those prayer times, they change every day. There's a set of novels that I love. If anyone has seen the movie Master and Commander, that's based on a set of 21 novels by Patrick O'Brien called the Aubrey Maturin books. And it's a wonderful, it's 20 books. That's all one long story about the friendship between Captain Jack Aubrey and Dr. Stephen Maturin in the British Navy at the beginning of the 1800s, right, during the Napoleonic Wars. And the doctor knows nothing about the sea and sailing and all of these ancient practices that all sailors are hip to, if they, because they've been at sea for so long. And the customs and practices of the sea are very important because, a ship is a little community. They're all over each other. They need these customs and practices to stay sane and to stay safe. They keep them safe because all those ships, occasionally they could go down with all souls on board lost. I'm mentioning this because at some point the doctor says to Jack, because Jack says, well, tonight's the half moon and there'll be enough light to do, this action where we're going to go, capture another ship or something. And the doctor says, oh, is it going to be a moon tonight? And everyone looks at him like, are you insane? Because every sailor on a ship at sea knows exactly the stage of the moon every day of the month because it affects them so much. It's unthinkable to them that a person wouldn't know what's going on with the moon, like this landlubber, the doctor. And likewise, we've lost touch with the moon, especially people who live in cities. Like, they barely notice the moon. Do you know Do you know where we are tonight? What kind of a moon are we going to have? Is it going to be a half moon, a full moon, etc.? But when you are more connected to daily prayer, you're also more connected to the calendar. You're more connected to the calendar and you see what's going on, what time of year, what time we're praying each day, what holiday is coming up. And the sort of afternoon prayer time is sort of the sharpest, easiest to notice. Like this week at our shul, all of the afternoon prayer services are at 5:15, even though the actual sunset is moving by about a minute or two every day. The time of sunset moves at about a minute or two every day. And as we approach spring, it goes faster and faster. In spring and fall, the time is changing very fast, a minute, 2 minutes a day. In winter and summer, as we're sort of nearing the end of the lengthening of the days and moving into the shortening, reaching the end of the shortening of days and moving toward their lengthening, the change gets slower. It's sort of like a curve, an asymptotical curve, if that's meaningful to people. Anyway, you're more aware of the celestial cycles when you're plugged into daily prayer. You mentioned why, because in the ancient world, is this applicable today? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what we're talking about in that question. Brian Stapp, if you're still with us, what are you asking? Is what ancient practice still going today? Tracy Lawrence says, Upthread Mary asked if a sage is a rabbi. If I may make an educated guess, a sage is a wise person who isn't ordained. A rabbi is wise, as is a sage, and has attended seminary and is ordained. Is this close to correct? Sort of. I mean, this idea of ordination, that's much more modern. It used to be that the title of rabbi, which really just means teacher, it wasn't so much going to a school necessarily as when the rabbis of the time felt you'd learned enough that you'd be given smicha, right? You'd be appointed a rabbi. And then, nowadays, yes, you go to school and you get a degree, and then you get the title rabbi. The sages, these days when we say a sage, we just mean a very wise and learned person, who's like a master in his field and can pass on knowledge. That's what the word means now. And, occasionally we'll refer to people even in the Jewish world as sages. But when we mean in the ancient world, is rabbis, they are rabbis, who were entrusted over these hundreds of years period with working out what Judaism would be in the post-temple period, right? So basically, when we're talking about Talmudic sages, we're talking about Tanaim and Amoraim, the rabbis of the Mishnaic period, right? So from about the end of the Second Temple period, maybe the year 0 more or less, to the year 200. Those are the rabbis of the Mishnah, known as singular Atana, plural Tanaim. And then the later rabbis from about 200 to about 600 who were doing the commentary on the Mishnah, this commentary known as the Gemara. Those rabbis are called singular and Amora, plural Amoraim. The Tanaim and the Amoraim is who we mean when we say the sages. Phyllis says, I'm a Christian, however, I love listening to you. You and your wife are precious people. I don't know about me, but I agree that Nina is precious. She's in her office right now, but she's monitoring the comments and making sure that the show is shared into the Accidental Talmudist forum and a few other Facebook groups. Folks, if you want to make sure you don't miss these shows, that you get notified, whether you're watching it live or later in the day, and you want to stay on this cycle with us, I'm doing this daily show. With God's help, I'll do this for the next 7.5 years. But you don't want to miss it, so make sure that you join the Accidental Talmudist forum. That's a Facebook group. We always post the show into the group. And also just go to Accidental Talmudist, our Facebook page, and under liked, change your settings from default or standard to see first, right? So that it's going to show up high in your news feed and you won't risk missing it, okay? You can also sign up for our email list. That's much less frequent. We sort of send out the highlights of the material that we're sending out. We do that usually about twice a month. And you can join our email list by going to our website, accidentaltalmudist.org. Okay, my friends, that's it. That's the last comment. Great to be sharing this wisdom with you. Today, we heard the story of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua. and how it led to Gamliel's impeachment and replacement by Elazar ben Azariah. Very colorful story over the, as we study this together in the years to come, God willing, we'll keep encountering these personalities. Gamliel especially, in about 3 years, will be an incredible story, the tale of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. God willing, we'll still be together when we get to that. I would say the takeaway of today is that, number one, prayer grounds you and connects you to what's going on both in the natural world, in the spiritual world, in the interpersonal world. When we say that we're going to perform an action for the benefit of the people, one that also benefits us, we have to be really careful about our own intentions and motives. Very, very careful. My pals, it is great to learn with you. Sending you big love from LA.